Hi guys, today I'm going to be doing my February wrap up. I read 9 books during February, which I was really pleased with, but there's a very weird mix of books because I got ill in February and couldn't really read anything because my head was so fuzzy, and then I went away and so I was working a lot and I just didn't really get anything read then. So I kind of binge read a lot of books and also went for a different mixture of books than I probably would have usually gone for, but I really liked it and really liked the books I read. There are some all-time favourite books in here which I was so pleased with, and I'm going to get into it because I can't wait to show you what I read. So the first book that I read in February was The Mermaid Mrs Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gower. This is the book that I'm talking about when I say this has become an all-time favourite book. I absolutely adored it. I became obsessed with it. I haven't stopped thinking about it since or trying to recommend it to people. I really want everybody to read this book. I think I love this so much because it is set in Georgian England and I love reading classics, and so it was nice to read a modern book but set in that time period that I like reading about, and so it was really nice to get the mix of the two, and you get a different perspective too, because often when you're reading like Georgian and Victorian books, what you find is that there's a certain amount of censorship because things then wouldn't have been allowed to be published, but when you read modern fiction that is still set there, you get maybe not an authenticity to it, but you get this story that is told and you don't have to censor what it's about, and you can just tell it very honestly and truthfully based on research. And this was a very well researched book, and you could definitely tell that when you read it. Although the book is written in third person, it follows two main characters, one being Jonah Hancock, who is a merchant, and the other being Angelica Neal, who is a prostitute. And I love the two different perspectives, how they were very different people but came together in the last half and just brought this wonderful characterization to the table. So the premise of the book is that Jonah Hancock is a merchant and his ship has been away for a long time and is due back right at the start of the book, and the captain that is looking after the ship comes back and says, oh, by the way, I've sold your ship and bought a mermaid. And these mermaids were quite popular in Georgian England, and what they were half monkey, half fish, but the people thought that they were mermaids and they were put on show and seen as these wonderful things to look at because they were so weird. And the book talks about the mermaid and about Angelica Neal as she lives as a prostitute and works as a prostitute and lives this very extravagant lifestyle. And I loved Angelica as a character. She is the kind of character who maybe you wouldn't think would be very likeable, but I really loved her. I loved how her and Jonah were very different characters, and so it was very easy to follow both of their stories, but the way that their stories converged was really nice, and I just completely fell head over heels in love with this book. I really do think you should all read it. It's really sweet at times but also quite gritty as well, and I think tells the story of two people who often get unheard in history. I gave this one 5 stars, and I will be reading everything that Imogen Hermes Gower writes from now on because I have just become obsessed with it. I really want everybody to read it. I know I've said that already, but I just can't express how much I love this book. I want you to find out for yourself how amazing it is. Next up, I read Misfit by Charlie Howard, which is a non-fiction book looking at Charlie's life as a model, particularly detailing her time when she was told that she was too fat, even though she was really clinically underweight and had an eating disorder, and she was told that she was too fat to model and she was kicked out of her modelling agency. And since then, Charlie has become a really great advocate for positive role models in the modelling industry and how actually we need all types of body types and not just one image of what a model should be like. And I loved how this talked about how she got to that point and how she developed an eating disorder, and it's also about being a misfit, not really fitting in, how in the end that's not a bad thing and you can conquer that, and it is your differences that make you so original. And I thought it had a lovely message. If you don't like reading about eating disorders, you might want to bear in mind that this talks about eating disorders in quite graphic detail during the book. I know there'll be some of you who don't really want to read about that type of thing, and that is absolutely fine, but I just wanted to give you the heads up before I recommend it. I've since followed Charlie on social media, on her Instagram and Twitter, and it's really nice to have read the book and then to see what she's doing now and how she's moved on from that and is seeing it in a positive light, and I think the book really reflects that and is quite empowering in a way. Even though this awful thing happened to Charlie, she's actually taken something from it and is making a really good example example of a practice that is so bad in the modelling industry. You may have heard if you watched my January wrap up, but this year I'm trying to read at least one poetry collection every month. And last month I read some Sir Walter Scott and some Sylvia Plath, so this month I wanted to go more current, and the first poetry book that I read was Plum by Holly McNish. She's one of my favourite modern poets. She also wrote Cherry Pie under the name Holly Poetry, and this is her most recent collection, and I love this. I think it's my favourite collection I've read from her so far, and I love the format of it. So basically she takes poems that she wrote when she was younger, some from when she was 8, and then writes an updated version knowing that she has experienced a lot more since she wrote those original poems. And there's a nice balance there between poems she wrote when she was a teenager and how she's taken things from her life since to build on those poems and make them stronger. But at the same time, the poems that she wrote when she was younger were absolutely brilliant and I loved all of them. Sometimes when I read poetry collections I get quite bored, but I didn't with this one. I loved all of the poems in it and thought they were really well put together. It was a really cohesive collection, and I think that if you're a bit new to poetry you'll really like this because it's an easy read, but you can also get a lot out of it, so I would highly recommend Plum. I also realised that I've said I would highly recommend this a lot in this video, but I genuinely read so many books that I think you should read in February, and the next one is my favourite thing ever. This book means so much to me, and it is The Complete Tales of Beatrix Potter by Beatrix Potter. So I had a book of The Complete Tales when I was younger, and I had it up to a few years ago, but it's in my house somewhere and I think it must be in our garage or something, and I haven't been able to find it. And I was so desperate to read these stories again, and so I ordered myself another copy, and I just love this so much. I get quite emotional talking about it because Beatrix Potter means so much to me, and I just love her books and they are what I grew up reading, and so to revisit them again when I'm older is just so special. This is a book that I powered my way through when I was ill. My head was so fuzzy, I could hardly concentrate on any words, but reading this and looking at the pictures was just the best antidote, and it made me feel so special and loved, and it just reminded me of my childhood and how much these books mean to me. In terms of my favourites, it's really difficult. My favourite is always going to be The Roly-Poly Pudding, or The Tale of Samuel Whiskers. I love that story and I used to reenact it when I was younger, which is a bit weird I suppose when you think about it, but I just love that. I love, there are so many that I love. Peter Rabbit obviously is the classic, The Tale of Tom Kitten, The Tale of Mrs Tittlemouse. I just love them all. I love them. I owe so much to Beatrix Potter's writing, and it was so nice to explore these stories that have inspired me so much over the years. I've written my own stories based on hers when I was younger. I've read these ever since I could first read, and to go back to them now was so nice. The next book I'm not going to go into too much detail on because it is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, and I recently posted my Wuthering Heights book talk, so you can go and watch that as part of the Bronte book club. I really loved rereading this again. It made me realise how much I love it, and I think this month I was really revisiting a lot of books like Beatrix Potter, Emily Bronte. I just loved that nostalgia that it gave me, and it was really nice, especially when I felt a bit rotten, to go back to this. And I read this when I was in Haworth and I was at the parsonage and on the moors, so it was really atmospheric too. So you can go ahead and watch my full discussion if you would like to. I'll leave a link to it in the description and up here too. I really love talking about it for the book club. I love getting to read it again, and if you'd like to join in with the next 2 months, our book is Agnes Grey, which I can't wait to reread. After that, I read one of my most anticipated books of the year, which was I Was Born for This by Alice Oseman. I loved this and I couldn't believe that I was lucky enough to get a copy. I got it from NetGalley if you're interested. I feel like I Was Born for This is a very different Alice Oseman book, but still has the qualities I love best in her books, like these very realistic characters in very realistic situations. And this book follows 2 characters, Angel and Jimmy, and Jimmy is part of a band called The Ark, and Angel is a huge fangirl. She runs a fan account and absolutely idolises Jimmy, and it's set over 1 week where their lives collide, and I thought it was brilliant. I could not put it down. I couldn't wait to finish it just because I wanted to find out what could happen, and I was not disappointed. So I've already pre-ordered a copy. I can't wait until I get the physical thing in my hands, and it comes out in May. So if you love Alice Oseman's books, you are going to love this. I just can't wait for everybody to read it because I know it's going to be huge in the YA world. Even if you're not a huge fan of YA, I think that it's got something for everyone and really looks at why we're a fan of something and what happens when we become a fan of something and you end up disappointed. This really looked at the psychological side of being a fan and I thought it was really interesting from that perspective. Then I read The Robin, a Biography by Stephen Moss, which I started at the start of the month but then didn't finish until the end of the month because I went away and didn't want to take too many books with me. I liked this one, but I was a bit disappointed in places. Basically, the structure of this is that it goes through every month of the year and talks about what Robins are doing at that time. But I would have liked a bit more of a personal side. I'd like to know why Stephen Moss chose to write about Robins and feel that passion about them, but I didn't really get that at any point in the book, and it also felt like it was very repetitive. So in spring, he'll talk about something that's going to happen in autumn, and so by the time you get to autumn, you're like, I've already read what's going to happen and so I don't really care. But at the same time, I loved how it was designed with these lovely illustrations and it's got a really nice feel to it too. So I can't say with full confidence whether you'll enjoy this one, but I think it's one you'll have to read for yourself, and if you love Robins like I do, then you might enjoy it. The next book that I read was Bygone Badass Broads by Mackenzie Lee, and I was really excited when I got sent a copy of this to review. This looks at lots of women throughout history that you may not have heard of but have done incredible things, and is also illustrated by Petra Eriksson. So inside it looks like this with an illustration of the woman in question, for example Anne Lister, and then a bit about her. It's written in a very colloquial style, so it's very cool and accessible, and I liked that about it. At times it was a little bit irritating, I must admit. I just wanted some hardcore facts at some point, but at the same time it was a really nice read as well. Quite good to read and then go away and do your own research. It follows in the same vein as books like Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls, and I think I prefer this one to Goodnight Stories slightly, but I'm getting a bit sick. I feel like this market is quite oversaturated now and I don't really know if anything new can be brought to the table. I'd much rather hear about the women in detail, but I do like the idea of it at the same time. So I really like this one. I think it's good to find out about lovely women and often complex women throughout history, but I loved it, but at the same time I just am a bit fed up of books like this now. And then the final book that I read in February was Inside the Wave by Helen Dunmore, which is a poetry collection that won the Costa Book of the Year award and was also the last collection that she wrote, sadly, before she passed away. I really liked this, but at the same time I read Simon from Savage Reader's Goodreads review, and he was saying about how he felt that the way that it's been put across is as a collection of poems about death and things like that, and is quite dark, but I don't really think that that's what this collection is about. At times it's quite hopeful and there are a few poems about death, but it's very classical too, and I was a bit confused about that, and I would have liked a bit more cohesion in it. That's what I like in my poetry collections. Poems that feel like you can read them seamlessly and you still get the same feel from them, but I did feel like this was slightly all over the place in terms of that, and it's definitely been sold as something that it's not. So it's a really good poetry collection. I might try and read some of her other poems just to see if it's just how this one has been marketed since it won the award. But I liked it. Don't think it's my favourite, not really my style of poetry, but I'm really glad that I read it. So that was my February reading wrap up. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I would love to hear what you read in February. What was your favourite book? What was your least favourite book? Is there anything that you'd recommend that I read based on the books I've read this month? I really love to know in the comments. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. Happy reading!